Welcome back to Mark Holubus Vlog, everyone. Thanks for joining in on this beautiful, definitely snowy kind of day. And if you've been watching the other channel, you'll notice that we're having to get creative. Obviously, with a lot of snow that we've had lately, there is no workaround. Obviously, this is just what we have in Alberta. So it's kind of interesting and it's fun to drive the cars in the wintertime, slip sliding around. But there's two things I want to talk about today. Number one happens to be the infamous key fob like we have here. We have the Jaguar Key Fob. And if any of you guys are driving an F-Type or another reasonable facsimile, maybe another type of modern day Jag, you'll notice you probably have a similar key fob. I'm going to share with you some of the tips that I'm aware of, some of the things I've learned. Now, there's no rocket science, and some of them are straightforward and maybe some of them aren't, but I want to share that with you. But before we get into that, I also want to talk about what's going on in the Canadian market. There's some big changes that the federal government's talking about bringing into place, and it's all around taxation, and it's going to have a huge impact on the automotive industry as we know it today. It's a sad, sad day, particularly for the supercars and exotic cars or anything actually fun to drive. Not only that, there are some other things going on in the US side and the Canadian side of the border regarding electric vehicles and incentives that they're talking about. I also want to touch on that briefly too. Oh, hi. So before we actually dive into the whole key fob conversation, and I'll show you some of those little tricks or tips that I personally know about it, I would just want to talk about some of the news items that I referred to that I said I would discuss. And one of them actually has to do with the electric vehicles and the ones that are produced in the United States specifically, and by the three big manufacturers. Likely you're talking about Dodge, Ford, and GM. And the fact that a lot of them are produced and built by union workers, which is great, I get it, but there's some protectionism going on. Now, of course, everybody knows I'm from Canada. I do see this from both sides of the spectrum. I understand, the country's looking at after their best interest, trying to do the best they can, provide work for, provide jobs, essentially. So I understand that. The flip side is, I guess, with what's happening is that directly impacts Canada. Now, apparently a lot of Canadian manufacturers, or there is a lot of Canadian manufacturing of automobiles going on, largely because some of the resources, a lot of it has to do with the exchange of the dollar, and the rate is often poor in Canada, so a lot of times there's profits to be made by building the cars on the Canadian side of the border. But if this actually happens, if this $12,500 credit is offered to consumers in the United States, for buying an electric vehicle manufactured by union workers in the US, what is likely going to happen is it's going to start drastically hurting the Canadian manufacturers or the Canadian builders and likely the Canadian factories. So the flip side is, of course, Canadian side feels the burn. Now, that seems to be the trick. I don't know. I don't know what is the answer in this. I mean, every country obviously has to take care of their own. I know the NAFTA is the thing. The North American Free Trade Agreement is something that's been previously agreed upon between United States, Canada, and Mexico. Now there's other benefits there that tie it all together, that there's essentially a trade agreement that happens between the three countries. Now, I'm not a politician. I'm not pretending to know all of every detail around NAFTA or the politics behind this, but I do know that if this $12,500 credit goes to consumers, likely that's enough incentive to buy, say, a $40,000 electric vehicle. You're probably going to buy something that's built in the United States. You're probably going to buy, say, a Chevy Bolt or something like that that's likely going to be built by that type of, from that factory. So that is likely going to have a significant impact on the Canadian market. Now, I know the players at the top end of both Canada and the US, I know there's been conversations between the two, and I don't know where this will settle out. Personally, I think it's a bit of an awkward stalemate, potentially. The Canada's top players are talking about hitting it with tariffs on items that they sell now to the U.S. market. I don't know what the right answer is. It sounds like kind of a bad place to be, but ultimately what that means is factories in Canada are likely going to take a hit. I don't know what that means at the end user, but truly, I think from the consumer's perspective, the reason why Canada, Mexico, and US have all collaborated in the past is for maximizing profits, which is good for the manufacturer, but potentially as well creates better buying opportunities for the consumer. So it seems like it's a win-win for everybody when everybody's playing in the same sandbox and playing nicely with the same toys. but I don't know if that's going to happen. So we'll see. But anyway, enough about that. That's for the big players to talk about. The other one is something hot off the topic that's going on. I know there was some conversation last year. The top players, again, on the Canadian side of the border, were talking about, they've been throwing money down the tube. Obviously trying to keep people, try to support, Canadians essentially during this whole time of crisis over the last, almost 2 years has been challenging. So they've been throwing money at it like it's going out of style. They've been printing money like there's no tomorrow. I think they've had build printers upon printers upon printers to keep pumping the money out, just to keep printing new money to be able to pay for all these little exercises to throw money at the Canadians. Now, the downside to that is, of course, inflation cranks up. And when inflation cranks up, dollars weakened, it creates all kinds of ugliness there. But what's happening now as a result is the Canadian market, or the top players, are saying, look, we're going to have to generate that money from somewhere. So now you can't just create it. It just can't go like that. When you print it, it's got to come from somewhere. Now they want to start taxing again. So, well, they don't want to tax the masses. So the majority of the mainstream population, the blue collar worker, they don't want to hit any of them with additional taxes. And I get it. Nobody needs more taxes. Nobody. What they are talking about doing is hitting luxury tax items. So the top players are saying, look, we're going to try to pass this in the House of Commons, a new law that will apply a 10% tax across the board for items, cars, for example, worth over $100,000, boats over $250,000. And there's a lot of other items, I believe, that are kind of plugged into that whole equation. Now, what does this mean for buyers of exotic cars? Well, quite clearly, you go out and buy, on the U.S. side of the market, cars are pricey. You can see, you go and buy a new Lamborghini, you know what it's going to cost you. But on the Canadian market, it's 30% more. Like, so whatever you guys are looking at, say it's a $300,000 Lambo, Canadian side of the market, you're probably paying closer to $450 for that same car in Canadian dollars. So think about that. $400,000 car, you're going to tack another 10% on. Basic math, that's 40 grand just in taxes. That's additional luxury tax. Now keeping in mind, there's a lot of provinces here in Canada that are already paying other taxes, PSTs, GSTs. Now they're talking about hammering with this luxury tax. I mean, before you know it, you're paying 50%. I mean, it's probably not that extreme because it's all the details haven't really been shaved out yet. But the fact of the matter is, the federal government is looking at applying some huge taxation here across the board to the tune of about 10%. Now, a lot of people say, well, why, first world problems. And yeah, that's unfortunate. And I do agree. Again, this isn't, we don't want to see taxes applied to anybody. Definitely not the middle class. Definitely not any class for that matter. And in theory, one always wonders, well, the top corporations seem to skate through and avoid all these taxations, and they come out, net zero at the end of a year on earnings for the top players. Yeah, there's some of that goes on. The problem is hitting a 10% luxury tax on that $100,000 vehicle is what? I mean, a $100,000 vehicle in Canada today is what? A BMW M3, a BMW M5, an Audi RS series of cars of pretty much any generation. Even a lot of, Cadillac Escalade, for example, is over 100 grand. So yes, they're luxury vehicles, but they're not extreme vehicles. They're vehicles that you see everywhere. Lots of people are driving them. And it's not just, and it is the middle class largely buying a lot of these vehicles. The intent is to tax the ultra rich, but that's not what they're doing. The actual hit is taxing almost everybody, because even a diesel pickup truck in Canada right now, you go out and buy a Denali diesel and you can pay $125,000 for that truck. That could be just a guy doing some work. Okay, maybe a Denali's a little excessive, but even a diesel one-ton crew cab, with some of the features and bells and whistles, you're going to pay over 100 grand. You're going to hit that person who's a working class citizen with an additional 10%. How is that a luxury tax? They're labeling it luxury tax. That's BS. However, that's what's starting to happen. So the Canadian market is taking a huge hit, both, potential job loss, obviously through the manufacturing side, if this whole 12.5 $100,000 incentive goes through south of the U.S. Canadian border, but also more importantly, this 10% tax applied to almost anything over 100 grand is guaranteed to have a huge impact. Now, I'm hearing a lot of people hustling around already trying to buy that car because it hasn't been passed in the House yet. Now, they're talking about it. Now, of course, recently, if you're not aware, there was a federal vote here in Canada, and during that time, everything kind of got, everything got put on the back burner. Of course, the whole conversation about this luxury tax, amongst many other conversations. But the point of the matter is, now that the election is passed and it's a thing in the rearview mirror, now it's back to business. And I've talked to some accountants and people that I know, in the business world, and they're convinced that the luxury taxes get back on the table. Now, it hasn't been pushed through just yet, but it's not a matter of if it happens, it's more of a matter of when it happens. And the budgets always seem to come out in the spring, and then again in the fall, there's big adjustments to the budget and big announcements. So the feeling is this might actually hit the spring budget cycle. So if you're talking March, April, May, in that range, there's a possibility that in the Canadian market, all of a sudden, out of the blue, you could find yourself walking up facing another 10% on top of that vehicle. Now, again, boo-hoo, I know first world problems, but a lot of it, again, is your working person, buying that, 1-ton truck just to haul materials for construction activities. Or even, even if it's not that, say it's your doctor, maybe it's your lawyer, and, maybe it's that small business owner that's buying that $110,000 car. They're not wealthy people. They're people just like you and I. They're people that have, worked their way through the system. They've worked hard in school. They've earned a degree or whatever. And, now they're starting to earn a decent dollar, but they're not wealthy. In most cases, these are not the wealthy. This is what you consider, still the middle class, possibly upper middle or middle class citizens anyway, and they're not loaded. And of course, if you're hitting the middle class or small business owners, those are the people that are giving jobs to others. So you're going to squeeze that person even harder. Why would you do that? From my perspective, without getting too political, I'm not trying to get too political, but I can see the landscape of the automotive industry, particularly in the luxury and the supercar world, changing a little bit here in the Canadian market. People are going to scrutinize a little more. They're going to be more reluctant to spend. Now, we know the market's been nuts here this last year with the purchase price of a lot of vehicles going up like this and escalating like crazy. But I do believe once that actual luxury tax hits, of course, it's not going to turn the lights off. People are still going to buy cars, and that's where the federal government knows that. But it will hamper some of it, and there will be a reluctance, and there will be decisions and choices, and people will start scaling back, and they'll be looking at that $50,000 car instead, and saying, what, I don't need to pay, just even out of principle, paying another 10% on top of even a $100,000 car. Throw another 10 grand on top of our current GST, which is 5%. Now you're at 15%. Plus, some provinces have an additional tax applied because they have what they call a PST or provincial sales tax. Lord knows what, you could be paying 30, 40, maybe more percent on top of the purchase price of a vehicle here in very short order. That is going to definitely have an impact on the automotive industry, particularly here in Canada. Obviously, that has nothing to do with the U.S. side of the border, but the whole, $12,500 thing actually does. And we'll see what this looks like as time goes on. But I couldn't help but notice it, and I do apologize. Normally, I don't want to get too political, but these are some things that I've been reading about lately, and it sort of triggered me, and I feel compelled to talk about it. I feel a little frustrated in that, that some of the governments are taking these types of positions, harder lines, and, it's really only going to hurt the majority of people out there. And, even if they're not buying a $150,000 car, there's nothing really to benefit from this because the trickle-down effect is always there. It is. And we'll see what happens, but stay tuned. Anyway, let's get talking, and I'll show you the key fob situation with the F-Type. So now let's talk about some of the things that these wonderful key fobs are doing. This is obviously one of the subjects that a lot of you guys dialed in for, and we'll talk about it. Here, let me show you some of the examples of some tips and tricks. First of all, this is a keyless entry style key fob. So in other words, a lot of what this key fob can do actually doesn't even require you using hands-on. That's the beauty. First of all, you don't need the conventional key. There's no ignition switch per se. There's actually just a push button start. But a lot of the brains are in here, and this is actually what controls what's going on. So first of all, let's give you a quick demonstration. Pretty simple. Click that. That's going to open. That's a simple one. Obviously, not a big rocket science going on there. Hit it again, and you'll notice it closes. Pretty straightforward trick there. Now, of course, you hit this, you'll notice the mirrors flip open, the door handle gets ready to flip open, and you're ready to go. That's by using the actual unlock button. If you use the lock button, 2-stage, it locks it, you get the beep, and you get the lights. That's 2-stage if you hit it twice. If you hit it once, it's just a 1-stage. Now here's another little trick. Now take a look. If you press and hold the unlock button, just holding it, notice the windows rolling down, see? And what it does is essentially flips the windows. Both of the windows are dropping down. Now, unfortunately, because of this particular, the way things are programmed in Canada, they're not allowing us to do the same thing on the close. Some markets, apparently holding the close, will operate the windows and close them, but that doesn't work in this particular market. Now, one thing, with the key fob in your pocket, you can now go and actually, if you get within a meter of the door, you're able to unlock the car. Now, all you do is simply hit that once. Now it's ready to go. But that only works if you've got the key in your pocket. Now you can open the door and you can close the door. So let's say you want to lock it. You can hit it once. See, it locks that. But if you want 2nd-stage locking, you can hit it again. Now there's another little feature if you absolutely have a dead battery. Say your key fob is toast, you don't get a chance to put the new battery in here because it happens. And maybe it doesn't respond to the push buttons. Maybe that's just what's happening. Maybe pressing this doesn't work because the key fob battery's dead. How do I get into the car if that's the case? You don't want to get too rammy. Well, did you know that there's a special key for this? And you take your key fob like this, and you'll notice there's a little arrow on the bottom. If you take a look right there, you'll see there's an arrow. That means you push this up, and then this releases, and it releases a key. You'll see there's a key in there now. Here's a special little key that you need to get into the cabin. Okay, so what you can do is you pull this, and you'll notice, as I'm holding this, there's actually a key slot down there. Now take a look as I take this special key now, which we have right here, and I slide it into that little slot right there. Just like that. And then you're able to undo and unlock the car and actually get back into the car. Now be careful when you're doing that. You don't want to scratch this paint around here or scratch this. Pretty easy to do is you put the key in there. It's metal and it's easy to scratch. But this is a way to get into the car if for some reason your key fob's not working or there's an issue and you just need to get in. This is one way to do that. And again, thanks everyone for dropping in. I really do appreciate it. And guess what? I'd love it if every one of you hit that subscribe button. If you're not already a subscriber, please make sure you do. If you are, thanks a lot. I really do appreciate it. And I'm just reviewing some comments right here by RF, for example, right here, who states, you do realize that the affair with the F-Type R is officially the realm of Calvin Klein's iconic Obsession cologne brand. You're hopelessly addicted, just like we are with the F-Type. Such is the power of a Jaguar over the man who owns one. You don't own a cat, the cat owns you. So thanks a lot again, RF. I really appreciate it. Great comments. And you're right. If you've never tried the F-Type R, guaranteed you're missing out. And if you do get a chance to drive one, I think it'll speak for itself. But anyway, thanks again, everybody. Be sure to drop a line. I'd love to hear if you guys have any more thoughts on the key fob or on the politics of this taxation system that we're about to see. Hope to see you real soon. Catch you then. Bye-bye.